Yo, what's up, guys? This is Dave with Dynasty Dorks. We're a year-round fantasy football podcast, and we do Dynasty and redraft content. Thanks for the follow. Good luck this season. What's going on, guys? It is day one of tampering, aka day one of free agency, and we have a plethora of moves that's going to affect your rookie drafts. Brought in one of the best in the business, my favorite guy, Popes. How you doing, sir?
What's up? I appreciate the compliment. I appreciate you having me on, and it was one hell of a tampering day. We'll say that. It's definitely exciting.
Yeah, I mean, there's barely left on anything left on the bone for the second wave. We got a lot of moves. We're gonna do this draft. If you're in the chat, we're gonna do this draft at 8 o'clock. What we're gonna do today is we're gonna do a Superflex rookie mock draft, 4 rounds. Do a linear format and try to get that real quick so we can get Jeremy's take on some of these rookies. And then we are going to talk a little bit about an actual mock draft. I'm going to try to keep this rotation at about 30 minutes and then do it every Monday until we get to the end of the off season, or at least to the end of the draft. So any one move that stands out for a big dynasty impact today?
I would say I feel like I wouldn't say like there's a huge move. I think Saquon's is definitely interesting. I really like DeAndre Swift. I think in Chicago, that's probably the real big one. I would say probably just a little bit on the younger side, but even Josh Jacobs in Green Bay. There's just a lot of them are really good. I really liked a lot of them. I'd probably say Jacobs and Green. Yeah, probably Jacobs and Green Bay could be really interesting. I'm gonna go back. I lied to you. I'm all over the board here. But Saquon probably. The only reason I'm going to say Saquon, and here's why. I think I like all of them and all the volume. I think there's a lot of impact for all those guys, but I think Saquon could change the way the Eagles play offense in general. You're losing Jason Kelsey already at center. Like the tush push might not really be there anymore. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you might see Saquon a little bit more. Not that Swift didn't get a ton of touches. He didn't have a ton, but you're still going to see Saquon a little bit closer probably to the goal line. You're probably going to see them run a little bit more, I would think, with the money they paid him. He's going to get used more, probably a little bit more of a feature than even DeAndre Swift would be my assumption. So I think that's good for Saquon. I think it's a better offensive line for him. And I think it kind of is a fallout in the other way for the rest of the players. You know, like, do we see the volume that Devontae Smith and AJ Brown and Dallas Goedert were getting? Additionally, do they add a receiver? You know what I mean? So, like, there's a lot that I think this offense might change a little bit in 2024 for us as far as fantasy goes and down the road for Dynasty with Saquon being there for a couple of years. So I'd say that really affects it. I think the rest of the moves don't affect the offense as much. You know what I mean? I don't know if you would agree there, Dave, but like I feel like Swift to the Bears is a nice fit. It's just going to kind of still be that run offense. You're also, I think Green Bay's not going to be much different with Jacobs. Obviously, maybe more volume to just one player as opposed to how they've been running with Dillon and Jones in the past.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be less pressure on Hurts, and it's going to be, like you said, different offense with Kellen Moore as well. And as a Giants fan, I absolutely am sick to my stomach with this. I hated seeing that. If you went anywhere else, I would have been thrilled. The Chargers, the Ravens, the Bears, the Texans, the Eagles are literally my number one team's the Giants. My number two is whoever is playing against Philadelphia. I absolutely hate the Eagles, but I'm going to take the low hanging fruit and go with Kirk Cousins. You
Yeah,
like
that's
that?
fair.
Just because Drake London finally gets a quarterback, Kyle Pitts finally gets a quarterback, and then you get Bijan Robinson, and so it really unlocks a lot of things for this offense if he can stay. If he looks good coming off of the health. So let's get this draft going. I took the low hanging fruit with the 101, and I know that there's been a few drafts where even myself have not taken Caleb Williams at the 101. But I'm going to go Caleb Williams at the 101 here. So is there anybody other than Caleb Williams that you're taking in the Superflex 101 spot as of today?
I'm going back and forth with Williams and Harrison. I think both are get a lot of people are getting into prospect fatigue, I think, with both of them at this point. We're trying to poke holes in these guys as opposed to necessarily the other players that we're trying to drive up. And I really just think that Harrison just is going to be a guy that's going to walk in and change a wide receiver room and an offense in general. So for me, I could see going Harrison because I also do believe a little bit in the more security built into the receiver prospects as opposed to the quarterbacks. We've seen plenty of quarterbacks bust, especially early in these drafts. So I'm not saying Williams will, and Harrison definitely could. So I'm not going to overly state that, but I do think that I would make a case for Harrison. Outside of that, I'm not really, there's not anybody else I'd probably
If
put at
Jaden
one at
Daniels
the
goes to
moment.
Washington,
No, I don't really. Jaden Daniels is pretty low for me. Honestly, where he went here is where I have him ranked. Even in Superflex. I like Jaden Daniels as a prospect. I think he gives you that dual threat ability, the rushing ability that we covet, but he's a lot smaller than the last couple guys that have kind of come into the league as far as that goes. We've already seen he can't really protect himself in the collegiate ranks. He's getting popped left and right. You get every game, you could probably find a highlight of him getting blown up. So there's that issue. I do think he's developed as a passer, but I still worry a little bit in that area at the NFL level. So I both think May and Daniels, it's a coin toss for those two at 2 and 3, but I would say I'm not really pushing Daniels up personally.
yeah. And so, just to recap for those that are listening, Caleb Williams at 101, Marvin Harrison Jr. 102, Malik Neighbors 103, Drake May at 104, Jalen Daniels at 105, Roma Dunze 106, then JJ McCarthy 107. We had an auto pick, unfortunately. Brock Bowers at 108, not a terrible pick. And then Popes went with Troy Franklin to 109. So let's talk about it. What are your thoughts here? Any surprises in the first four picks?
Probably JJ well, not in the first four. I mean,
Okay.
May over
Any
Neighbors, I feel like
surprises
a
after
coin
that?
toss. Probably McCarthy at 7. I know he's gaining a lot of steam. I do have him ranked inside the top 12, but he's literally at like 11 for me still. I want to see where he gets drafted. So that's probably a little bit of a surprise. I don't hate it. I do think that McCarthy's got a lot of good to his game, but I also don't know if there's really a high end ceiling that's being touted out there on the streets currently. I think he's a little bit more, not that Jared Goff is that bad, but like Jared Goff ceiling, Derek Carr type of ceiling. I don't even think he has Kirk Cousins built into him. I mean, maybe he could become Kirk Cousins. I think that's what you're hoping for out of McCarthy. So spending 1.7 when there's some better options out there is a little risky, but I don't hate it. We've seen it pay off before with going with quarterbacks a little bit later in drafts.
Yeah, and we don't know. It sounds like Denver. It sounds like the Raiders. It sounds like not Broncos, Minnesota. Minnesota is a lot. You hear a lot of Minnesota going there, and so I think it will be interesting. Got a question in the chat. Franklin over Thomas. Was that a hard decision for you? Is that an easy one?
It's fairly chalk, I would say. I have a group of 3 right there, and that's Troy Franklin, Thomas, and Xavier Worthy for me. That's where I have them. I like Troy Franklin. I think that there's some areas of Thomas's game that I'd like to see more from. Thomas feels like a 1-year hit kind of guy at the collegiate level. Obviously, he had players in front of him, but the role that he was asked to play did limit what he ran as in a route tree. And I do worry there might be a little bit of a learning curve for Brian Thomas into the NFL. Troy Franklin, I think, has proven that he can consistently produce. And I think landing spot will really break these two down. If Brian Thomas gets the JSN treatment where he's a third receiver in an offense, obviously we're not going to like him as much. If Troy Franklin, say, just ends up with the Bills as the secondary receiver with Josh Allen, I would be taking Franklin at 9 over Thomas all day. Like that would definitely open up the gap, but it's really close. I think it comes down to whatever you prefer. Thomas probably feels safer being a little bit of a bigger bodied receiver, though. I could see that.
Yeah, and I've always envisioned Thomas going to the Buffalo Bills or Jaguars, but he could go somewhere totally different. With Thomas, he's a bigger guy. You see him as an X. Franklin, he plays outside, but I feel like with his abilities, you can move him around a little bit, and that changes things.
I think
Obviously,
the perfect thing for me for Franklin would be like a Z, would almost be Stephon Diggs's role in a Bills offense. You know what I mean? Like kind of the Z that they're going to move around. Tyler Lockett esque, if you're a Seattle fan, like someone in that category where they're going to move him around a little bit, play some outside, play some inside, get him some free releases. I think that would be best for Troy Franklin personally. But
Yeah, and Daniel Jeremiah talked about this about having different having the receivers. They're not all ranked in a linear ranking. They're separated. Same with the running backs. You have like your speed backs and you have your pass catching backs, and um, here you have your move Z, like your DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs kind of guys that can move around. Then you got like Devontae Adams, they move him around quite a bit. But then you have guys that are strictly X, strictly play on, the one side of the field, right or left. And so like Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, kind of different, little different skill sets there. Not that they both can't do that, but just how they've been used. Dunze, he's been more of an outside guy. Like you said, Franklin moved around a little bit. Thomas, one of the things that they talked about was a lot of contested catches, but they just did a lot of the same routes. And so either did a go route or he did, back shoulder fade. And
mhm.
so it was a very limited tree, but he also it looks like he can't separate because he's got all these contested catches and that was part of the play.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at with Thomas. Is there wasn't an expanded tree. It wasn't that he can't. It's the same thing that I have a worry with a little bit with Neighbors. Like that's one of my knocks with Neighbors is like they didn't ask him to do a lot. I'm not saying they can't, but it's just like, can they, or did this the offense? Like, where's that off? Where's that line that we draw?
So,
So
so let's recap the first round. Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Drake May, then JJ Daniels. We have Roma Dunze, JJ McCarthy, Brock Bowers, Troy Franklin, Trey Benson, Brian Thomas, and then Keon Coleman. Then second round, we had Jonathan Brooks, Xavier Worthy, Donnie Mitchell, Braylon Allen, Lad McConkey. We have Bo Nix, Blake Corum, Malachi Corley, Xavier Leggett, Marshawn Lloyd, Bucky Irving, Devontae Walker, Tez Walker. You took Xavier Leggett. Let's talk about him a little bit.
yeah, I mean, I guess you could argue there's a disappointment from his weigh in. He's a little bit smaller at 6 foot, but still stout in that 219 area. So he's still kind of a big physical freak type of receiver, a guy that's again a limited route tree, and I'm kind of just banking at this point on the physical abilities and kind of that physical freak athlete style prospect profile. When we get into this category, I really think it's a wide open thing, and it's hard to really peg at this current moment. But I think Leggett just offers a little bit more as far as a high end ceiling. Um, Devontae Walker's interesting. I thought about him there, and then Roman Wilson, who you ended up taking, was another guy that's in that area for me. I also like Jacob Cowing, but right now, before we get really any landing spots, I'm going to go with the physical profile and that kind of breakout that we saw this past year.
So in most mock drafts, you're not seeing a running back in the first round, but in your
Mhm.
real drafts, you're going to see running backs go in the first round. We saw Trey Benson go here by our truth. I hope that's our truth, like WWE. Um, Trey Benson. Then I took Jonathan Brooks. Then you have Braylon Allen. I feel like if I asked all 12 of these drafters who their number one running back is, we might get 12 different answers. Um, what are
100%.
your what are your thoughts here? Trey Benson, Jonathan Brooks, Braylon Allen. Who's your number one?
So I have a group of four, and it's the four that went first. Trey Benson, Jonathan Brooks, Allen, and Corum. Allen's been my guy all throughout the process. I'm just really need to see a little bit more from the athletic testing. We didn't get that at the combine, and what we got wasn't great. So there's a little concern there. I really want to see where the NFL drafts him, to be honest. And I think that's what's going to happen with these four for me. I think that they all have question marks. They all have shown good upside in certain areas of their game. And then we have some injury concern with both Corum, Allen, and Brooks, to be honest. Even Trey Benson has some injury history. So there's a lot of injury slash lack of production slash high end production, but older. Like there's a lot of questions around these guys. So I think some draft capital is really going to help us out here. But right now I do have Benson, but it's really, really close between all four of those guys. Not
So
It's kind of a muddy way around the answer, I guess, right?
yeah, I mean, Leggett is a guy that a lot of people are poo pooing him because he's older, because of the 1 year of production, and again, he's more of a projection. And then there's people that, look at him and just say, listen, this guy dominated. And he was in the SEC, which is historically the best conference. He's going against top defenders, highly recruited players, and it's hard to ignore that combination of size and speed. Same thing with Brian Thomas. Um, the Texas boys had a nice combine, and so did Lad McConkey. How do you look at those three? The size concerns with Worthy, the injury concerns with McConkey. How do you view them? And I'll put Keon Coleman, who went at 112 in that four. How do you shuffle those guys up?
So I have Worthy at is the highest ranked. He's kind of in that first round territory for me, kind of where he went. Really, we'll have to see once the draft kind of shakes that out a little bit. And then I do have Adonai Mitchell right behind him, kind of in that next group, and then Lad McConkey, and then followed by Keon Coleman. I like what McConkey offers as far as a true kind of route savant. Like he really has that ability to separate, something that the NFL is really going to be looking for, kind of the way the league's going. He's a little bit on that undersized size, coming in under 200 pounds, but plenty big enough. I think he'll be fine in that category. Adonai Mitchell is hard to ignore. He kind of killed the combine in every area when it comes to receivers. So he's a guy that I wasn't super high on. He actually kind of rose a little bit for me after the combine, just because some of the stuff I didn't see on tape, he showed us at the combine. So I liked that. Xavier Worthy being so frail, we'll say, is a little concerning. The combine didn't do a lot for me with Worthy. I just expected him to be fast. I had some on X there. A lot of people were saying, well, he's world class fast. I get that. But the difference between 4.2 and 4.3 with pads on, there isn't one very much, in my opinion. And you could think the other way, and that's fair. But I just really don't see a big difference for him to jump up. So I think it's just going to be the landing spot for Worthy really is going to kind of gather a lot of that. But right now it's Worthy, Mitchell, McConkey, then Keon Coleman is last. A lot of separation issues with Coleman, ran that slow 40, which isn't great. His play speed's a little bit better, but it's a little bit disappointing, I guess, from Keon Coleman and the physical aspects that I thought would be a little bit better at the combine.
So everyone, including myself, passed up on Jalen Wright in the first two rounds. I passed up in the third round. Kind of rethinking that one a little bit. What are your thoughts on Jalen Wright? He's a kind of a polarizing player. Again, another projection, but he's got some serious speed, juice, and got some decent size on him.
So I'm really torn on Jalen Wright at the moment. I have him probably right about so he was what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he was running back 7, and I have him as running back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have him as 9 currently. But he could kind of pivot somewhere in there. I really want to see how the NFL draft goes for him. I think that the physical freak has always kind of been there for Jalen Wright. He's always shown that on tape. He's an explosive athlete. Always had some questions around the long speed, but he kind of gave us a little bit of that at the 40. So I do like Wright a lot, but his issues stem from stuff that's a little bit harder to fix, which is going to be obviously vision, the ability to not necessarily make people miss, but it's really that vision and finding the right lanes and kind of the blocking side of the game. So I don't hate Jalen Wright, but I don't love Jalen Wright either. I think he'll probably be a riser. If he gets day 2 capital, he's going to probably jump a lot of these guys, because I don't think we get, to be honest, I don't think we get 4 or 5 that get day 2 draft capital. So those 5 will probably push themselves up, just because I had mentioned this on a couple other podcasts as well, that the running back class is so bad. Like you'd mentioned earlier, you could argue that there's 12 different RB1s for anybody. And until we really get that draft capital in those landing spots, there's not going to be, I think, a set in stone type of ranking at the moment. But Wright is interesting, definitely more interesting after the combine. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm going to recap my team, just do a brief of my picks, and then I ask you to do the same thing, and then talk about some favorite players in the third and fourth round before we go to the Chicago Bears mock draft. So that's Caleb Williams. I do think he's going to go to the Chicago Bears. I don't think there's any any reason he does not go there. They have Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks is, he's a lot of people's number one. I got to talk to him at the combine, and he told us he'd be ready to go July 1st. And so that's music to our ears. He's one of the most explosive runners in this class. He's not a big running back, but he's got plenty of size. Little James Cook in his game, I've heard a lot. I heard some other comps, but just big playability. And the reason you don't have a long history of production is because he was buried in the depth chart there. I asked him who he modeled his game after, and he said Bijan Robinson. Gotta like that. And he's met with a lot of teams. So this guy's going to go decently early for a running back. Second and third round are basically the first round for running backs. Roman Wilson, I think he's a late riser. I think he's a hidden gem because he was just hidden in that Michigan offense. Nobody had any production except for Blake Corum, and the rest of the running backs, they didn't pass the ball much. And then I took a flyer on Brendan Rice. There's so many guys I'd love to talk about here in the flyer zone, and we'll see what the NFL thinks about him. But you look at somebody with serious pedigree. I'm not concerned about the production. Jordan Addison did not have a lot of production at USC after putting up gaudy numbers at Pittsburgh. They spread the ball around, and you just look at someone with, again, really good traits. Talking about size, it does not a huge separator. Has to clean some things up, but I think he'll get drafted early day 3, if not the end of day 2. Let's talk about yours.
Yeah, so I mean, I started out, I was at 1-9, went with Troy Franklin. I really like the potential upside there as far as just the speed and the transition to the game. I think he's going to land in one of those later half teams, better offense, probably be a field stretcher, whether that's KC, whether that's Buffalo. Trying to think who else is up in that area. Either way, in a spot that he's going to find a field stretching role in a pretty good offense, there might be some volatility to that. He might not always be so consistent, but I really like what he could potentially offer. 2-9 was Xavier Legette, kind of banking on that physical freak kind of late breakout. Obviously, there's concern with the age and really being the only season, but in this category, I think at the moment he's going to get drafted higher than the rest of these guys in a better situation. So I'm going to bank on that at the moment. 3-9 was Audric Estime, which I think is a really good steal, especially in this running back class. I think Estime is being overlooked. Yes, the long speed's not there, and that 4.7 is going to be great for us as Dynasty manager. Says he's going to sink a lot to the eye. I think he ends up being a sneaky player. He might get, I'm thinking round 4 is probably where he goes. He's probably going to end up in a situation where he's going to be a complimentary back to somebody, whether that's maybe in, New York, like the Giants, Dave, would be perfect to go along with Devin Singletary and Eric Gray. I think that'd be a good spot for him, something like that. Give him a power back, some touchdown production, a little bit of work there and first and second down. And then 4-9 is Jacob Cowing. Cowing's a guy that I really like targeting late in these drafts. Really productive player. He was a 4-year player and just a very productive player over time. Had a ton of touchdowns this past season for the Wildcats. And I think that it's a quick separator type of ability, good hands, can kind of play all 3 levels as a receiver despite being slightly undersized. And I'm just all in. I think Jacob Collins really a guy that should be targeted late. Could be kind of that similarity to the Tank Dell that you get a little bit later and be a pretty productive player. He's not the same player, but that kind of where you're drafting him to production rate.
So before we get into the Chicago Bears mock draft, favorite player, not your estimate pick, out of the third round?
Third round would be Jalen McMillan. I like that pick. I really like Jalen McMillan. Down year in 23. I think he'll be good in 24.
Yeah, I'm gonna ride the fence here. It's Michael Penix and Ricky Pearsall. I think Penix really showed off the arm, and he throws such a nice ball, and just his cognitive ability. They talked about his ability to read the defense and everything. We just have the concerns about the injury concerns, but he looks so much better than the other guys that actually threw the ball. And it's just, for me, it's just the injury stuff. And then Ricky Pearsall, I know is the highlight, and I really kind of overlooked him. He's a lot more than just that highlight. You can get him out in jet sweeps, bubble screens, do a lot of things after the catch. And, he's a guy that can move around as well, kind of a Lad McConkey light. And then fourth round, anybody in that round that you thought was interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised somebody didn't get drafted, which is Malik Washington.
Yeah.
Um, but not really a huge Ben Sinnott, maybe. I'm not really in on Sinnott. I think after Theo Johnson, like there's not really anybody worth drafting. Maybe Jared Wiley is a guy I like. Sinnott, maybe. I feel like Sinnott's gonna be a blocker. Um, maybe Dylan Loeb. I'm not totally in on the Dylan Loeb love, but I think at this point you're just taking flyers, so I don't hate really any of these. I think they're all good flyer picks. Johnny Wilson being last is really surprising. It's kind of a fall for him, but
Yeah. Yeah, if you're looking for some deep sleeper tight ends to go research, Tanner McLaughlin from Arizona. You mentioned Ben Sinnott, and then look up Devin Culp from Washington. He was the fastest tight end at the combine with 40 time. Javon Baker for me is interesting. There's been some love for him, and then it's kind of faded a little bit. And then Ray Davis, Ray Davis, a little older prospect. He's got he's a big body and he runs like a bruiser, but he's shown that he can catch the ball a little bit, has some decent pass protection. Yeah, um some receiving ability and stats last year. Yeah, all about the landing spot for Pearsall. So
Mhm.
let's talk about this. Did a quick little mock draft for the Chicago Bears. Hear me out. Chicago Bears only have 5 draft picks right now. So they may make a move to try to get some more. And every single time a quarterback signs, the likelihood of them getting any draft capital at all for Justin Fields is looking less likely. They might be just best to keep him on the team, but they may be able to move him for something. And so in this deal, I did move Justin Fields, but for a late 5th round pick, I put him in Indy. We got Anthony Richardson there, gets a backup for Richardson. Justin Fields, I think, is he's a professional. I think he's going to be good for Anthony Richardson. And if Anthony Richardson gets hurt, I think it's a good offense that Justin Fields can fit into. I traded back from the 9th pick for the Raiders so they can move up and get their quarterback to partner with Gardner Minshew, gave us a little bit of draft capital. So that sets the table. Our needs were quarterback, cornerback, defensive line, receiver, and interior offensive line. So I went with the quarterback first, Caleb Williams. Do you think there's anybody you think there's any world they don't take Caleb Williams at 1?
No, I think it's a good resetter. Mainly contracts. You're really looking at the NFL level. I'm not saying that Justin Fields may develop into something. I don't hate Justin Fields by any means, but you're really looking to get that deal of the rookie contract and kind of build a team around it. Caleb Williams resets that clock, equal prospect to what Justin Fields is, if not better, coming out of college. Definitely better, but better prospect coming out of college resets that clock. I'm in on that. I think that they should take Caleb Williams personally at this point.
So I went a
So
little boring for the next picks. I do think they make a splash with maybe a Calvin Ridley, maybe even make a move for T. Higgins. And that's why I did not go receiver with the next couple picks and traded back. I do think the 9 spot is a good spot to trade back. I've seen a lot of Roman Adunze there. I think that would make sense. He's an X. DJ Moore's, he talks about being a kind of the move Z. What are your thoughts here? Do you think it's that they got to go receiver early? Do you think that they make a splash with a Calvin Ridley? What do you think they do?
I think it'd be smart to trade it kind of how you did, but I also think if they stay, they should probably address the offensive line again. Personally, um, I don't think they need a receiver. Truthfully, I think you could get somebody later in this grouping. You can also go ahead and, like you said, there's some free agents out there. You could make a trade for the T Higgins or the Calvin Ridley's going to be out there. There's a lot of names that are kind of not great, but mid levels. Marquise Brown's out there. There's some players that can be added in free agency where they have a ton of space that would make more sense to me. Because not that DJ Moore's up there in age by any means, but he is getting close to kind of aging out. But they don't necessarily need to go out and grab a receiver to pair with Caleb Williams, I would say. It's hard to pass up. There are some really good ones, but I would prefer them to probably go elsewhere, whether that's defensive line or offensive line.
Yeah, I thought it might be a little early for Jackson Powers out of Oregon, but he's definitely climbing up, and he's the top, interior offensive lineman center. And I went with Dallas Turner and then Braden Fisk, really attacking the defensive line, and then
Hmm.
went with a lot of offensive line. Cedric Van Pran, probably the third center on the board by most people. Then I did get Javon Baker. But yeah, I think that Caleb Williams is going to need a veteran presence like a DJ Moore. But if you gave him DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley, really polished, veteran proven receivers, it really helps him not have to do as much. And then, like you said, offensive line, I thought about it a little earlier. Got
Hmm.
Tyreek Smith. It's a good safety class, really good free agent safety class, but they let Eddie Jackson walk. So they do got to pick somebody up. And then Zach Center, guard, Michigan. I think he's a mauler. I think he fits in that Chicago offense well. Then Tanner Bartoloni, very fast, great mullet. He's played multiple positions on the offensive line from tackle to guard. He's a shorter, stocky guy. He's more of a guard center, gives him flexibility. All right. Well, we got about 30 minutes. I appreciate you coming on. Where can we find your work?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at PopesFFH. You can find pretty much links to all my stuff there as well if you want the written content and stuff like that. That's all over at ftnfantasy.com. And again, thanks for having me, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, hey, we'll see you guys next week for another mock draft Monday. We will be mock drafting the Washington Commanders. We'll do a one quarterback mock draft. I think people still do one quarterback leagues, right?
It's still out there.
They still sometimes do that. So we'll do that. And as always, good luck this season.